Celebrities, politicians, and even books and movies are just a few examples of people and things that have been axed in what is widely described as cancel culture. Last week, journalist Alexi McCammond resigned as editor of Teen Vogue before she officially started, following backlash over past anti-Asian and homophobic tweets that she wrote when she was 17 years old. She apologized for using hurtful and inexcusable language. But in an article published in The Atlantic, writer Graeme Wood suggests that America has forgotten how to forgive people for their past mistakes. He writes, "A world in which McCammond apologizes for her old tweets is better than one in which she sees nothing wrong with them. For the sake of today's Teen Vogue readers, I hope that by the time they are McCammond's age, the current culture has developed its own process of expiation." Graeme Wood joins us now for more. Graeme, first of all, you make a point in your article about distinguishing between mistakes made when one is a teenager and mistakes made when one is an adult. Do you think that cancel culture shouldn't exist for things that people think and say when they, as you say, when their age begins with the number one?
Yeah, I mean, maybe even some of the ages when it begins with the number two. I remember being a teenager myself. I think every adult remembers what it was like to be a teenager and probably recognizes at some point that the whole point of being a teenager is to make mistakes and to fix those mistakes, as Alexi McCammond did. Even before she was hired, she knew that she had said something wrong, and she said she apologized. She said it wasn't her anymore. And I do think that adults even if they're writing for a teen audience, should be telling people, yes, you're going to make mistakes as a teenager. It's not worth being a teenager if you don't make those mistakes, and then correct them. And then later in adulthood, have forgiveness for yourself and for others who made similar mistakes during those years.
And Graeme, you make a larger point in saying that you think that there's a resistance to letting people move on from past mistakes, even when they've apologized and taken accountability. But do you think that there should be repercussions that follow hateful language, homophobic language, racial slurs that people have made at any point in their life if they do apologize and take accountability, perhaps when they're older?
Yeah, if there's a teenager who said something and then years later has become a different person, I'm of course very open to the possibility that that person really is repentant for the attitudes that he or she had in the past. Now, if I found out that my boss said something racist last week, last year, or even if I found out that my boss said something racist as a teenager and still thought it was an okay thing to say, then of course I would think that person should have repercussions for that. So it's not that people shouldn't be held to account, but there should be an understanding that if someone understands his or her failures and then approaches the world with a broken and contrite heart, then there has to be a path forward where we accept that person's apology and move forward and try to cooperate and have a better world together.
Let's talk about the overarching premise of your article, that America has forgotten how to forgive. I want you to talk a little bit more about that with our viewers and where you think we need to head if the path is away from cancel culture, but towards greater accountability.
Yeah, I mean, I think Americans still know how to forgive. If my neighbor comes up to me and says, "Hey, I drove over your mailbox, and I'm really sorry for it, and I'll get you a new mailbox and a case of beer thrown into the deal," then I think that's an interaction we all understand. But we don't just live in that face-to-face world anymore, especially in the pandemic era. But even before that, social media has really changed things, and that kind of face-to-face grace, charity, human interaction is just a lot less common. And so I think in the social media sphere, and then also in a certain culture, you call it cancel culture or call out culture, where there is a culture of denunciation, where instead of trying to figure out, does this person intend offense? Does this person wish that he or she said something differently instead of the way that the person said it? In that culture, there really doesn't seem to have been worked out a way to move forward once the apology has been made. Instead, it is denunciation now, denunciation forever, and implicitly the desire that whoever has said these bad things or did these bad things disappears, doesn't work again. That doesn't seem like a culture that anyone would want to work in, or even really live in. We all need forgiveness sometimes, and we have to figure out ways in every culture, social media, work culture, uh, relationships between races. All of these are spheres where we have to figure out ways forward, and that will include some mode of forgiveness.
Now, Graeme, in McCammond's case, the criticism that she faced were in response to comments made 10 years ago on social media that, as we all know, now live forever. But they were also, in some ways, personal. You're a member of the Asian American community, and she said hurtful things about Asian Americans. And we're in an environment right now where we are trying to battle with anti-Asian American bias and hate. How did you go about the mental process yourself of forgiving her those comments and then writing this article?
For me, as someone of Asian descent, it was not a difficult call. I mean, every Asian person has heard comments like this, has heard sentiments like this, and again, if it's something that was said 10 years ago by someone who has learned not to say those things and not to think those things, then I could easily imagine working for a boss who had bad tweets in her past, and approached her future work with contrition. Um, when I think about it in my own personal case, it's just not that difficult to imagine that the person I work for might have done something wrong in the past. In fact, I would even say that I would prefer to have a boss who understood her fallibility and approached me with the kind of charity that I myself am going to need sometimes, because she knew she needed it too.
So, Graeme, this is a much more humane position than a lot of the outrage that we've heard from others. I'm wondering how we come about making that cultural shift from this moment that we're in right now to actually being able to strike a balance between forgiving people for things that they've said and done in the past, while also making sure that actual responsibility for actions are taken, because it is not uncommon to hear these reports and then immediately there is an apology and I'm going to better myself. At times it feels rather hollow. So how do we actually better our society in a way that holds people accountable and still allows people to make mistakes, to suss out that difference between faux apologies and people actually trying to be better humans?
Yeah, I think, of course, we need to figure out if someone's apology is sincere. And if the person continues to say things, do things that suggest that the apology is insincere, then I fully support whatever countermeasures are required. That said, for changes of heart, for sincere changes of heart, and for people who are being taken into account for things they said or did 10 years ago, I do think that we need some kind of procedure, some process. I mentioned in the article I wrote in The Atlantic that religions all have ways for people to expiate their sins, to expunge their sins from their record. I used to report on ISIS. Even ISIS, for some crimes, would say, hey, you took a drink of alcohol, we'll whip you on the back a few dozen times, and then we'll call it even. So I don't know what that procedure is going to be in our culture, but I know that right now, social media does not have it. There is no second chance. There is no way for someone to say and to be believed by everybody that, hey, I did wrong and I want to make it better. So we're still in, I think, the early days of social media, and we're going to have to take a good hard look at whether that culture that's being created by it is one that we want to live in. And to make it one that we want to live in, it's going to include some expectation of grace and charity that's directed at other people. It's going to include some way for people who have made mistakes and who own up to those mistakes to have a process of repentance and expiation. Like I say, it doesn't exist right now, and it's probably going to take a bit longer before it does.
Yeah, but more grace in this world certainly would be a good thing. Graeme Wood, thank you.
Thank you.